He built his life on 1,500 acres of land passed down through generations, a symbol of his family's blood, sweat, and survival. But one morning, strangers showed up claiming it was no longer his. The HOA, a group that was supposed to protect the community, had quietly sold it without his consent. It wasn't just land they took, it was history, legacy, and dignity. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't about to walk away. His response would be so calculated, so legal, it would leave them with nothing. How did a stolen dream turn into the ultimate act of justice? James Carter was a man rooted in his land, 1,500 acres of rolling fields, oak trees, and quiet streams. This wasn't just property to him, it was the heart of his family's history, passed down from his great-grandfather who had bought it after years of backbreaking labor. Every fence post, every plowed row, carried the weight of generations who refused to let their hard-earned legacy slip away. Life was steady for James. Mornings started with the sound of roosters, afternoons with the hum of his tractor, and evenings on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Neighbors respected him, at least, that's what he thought. He paid his dues, followed the rules, and kept to himself. Then, small things began to shift. Letters from the HOA became more frequent, requests for compliance updates, notices about new policies, and strange accusations about property violations that made no sense. He dismissed them at first, believing it was all just a misunderstanding, but the tone of those letters grew sharper, colder, almost personal. One late afternoon, James spotted a group of unfamiliar men standing at the edge of his property, pointing and jotting notes. They didn't wave. They didn't introduce themselves. Something in his gut told him they weren't just passing through. What James didn't know yet was that a plan had already been set in motion, one that would strip him of everything his family had fought for. And when the truth came out, it would ignite a battle that the HOA never saw coming. It started with a letter marked urgent. James opened it to find the HOA claiming he owed thousands in back fees he had never agreed to, for services he never used. The letter was laced with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. Failure to comply will result in legal action. He shook his head. His land wasn't even part of the HOA. At least, that's what his deed said. Days later, another letter arrived. This one was worse. It stated that due to unresolved violations, the HOA had voted to reclaim his land and place it up for public auction. James's hands trembled as he read the words, reclaim. They had no authority over him. It felt absurd until he realized they'd filed fraudulent paperwork at the county office, quietly changing property records to list his land as common area. James hired a lawyer, but the delays were deliberate. Hearings were postponed. Paperwork mysteriously lost, deadlines missed by the clerk's office each time he tried to fight. The wall got taller. The neighbors he'd known for years began avoiding him. Rumors swirled claims that James was in debt, that he'd neglected the land, that selling it was for the community's benefit. Then came the day he never thought he'd see. A stranger knocked on his door with a folded document in hand. It was the final notice. The HOA had sold his 1,500 acres to developers. Bulldozers were scheduled to arrive within weeks. James felt the air leave his lungs. This was no misunderstanding. This was a theft, wrapped in the disguise of bureaucracy and fueled by something uglier than greed. Whispers of racism had always floated beneath the surface in this small town, but now it was out in the open. An HOA board made entirely of people who had never wanted a black man. Owning that much land had found their way to take it without a gun or amass just a pen and a stamp. James didn't sleep that night. He sat on his porch, staring out over the moonlit fields, thinking of his great-grandfather's calloused hands, his father's sweat, and the legacy that was supposed to last for generations. By dawn, grief had hardened into resolve. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And James knew just where to start, by digging into their own property records, their own shady deals, and the one legal loophole that could turn the tables entirely. What he found would give him the power not just to take back what was his, but to make the HOA regret ever crossing him. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. On one side, the HOA board sat smug, certain this was just a formality before the judge dismissed James's frivolous claims. On the other, James stood alone, no high-priced attorneys. Just a man who had spent sleepless nights buried in dusty county records and law books. He approached the bench, holding a thin stack of papers. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but burning with conviction. "This isn't just about property lines. This is about fraud, and I have the proof." One by one, he laid out the evidence: forged signatures, backdated documents, and recorded deeds that mysteriously appeared only after the HOA voted in secret. Then came the bombshell: an obscure state law, still in effect, stating that if an HOA board commits fraud in the acquisition of property, all board members' homes become subject to sale to repay damages. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward, scanning the highlighted passages James had carefully marked. The HOA president's face drained of color, and according to the records, James continued, your homes were purchased with funds directly tied to the sale of my land. That makes them eligible for seizure." The room erupted: shouts, scrambling attorneys, the HOA board frantically whispering among themselves. The smugness was gone, replaced by the raw fear of people who realized the trap had closed around them. For months, they'd stripped him of everything. But now, the power shifted. James wasn't just winning his land back, he was about to own the very houses of the people who tried to destroy him. The judge banged the gavel for order, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew the tide had turned. James locked eyes with the HOA president and said, quietly enough for only him to hear, "You took my legacy. Now I'm taking yours." The ruling was final. Within weeks, the very board members who had voted to strip James of his 1,500 acres were packing boxes, watching moving trucks pull away with their lives inside. The land they'd stolen from him was restored: every acre, every tree, every piece of his family's legacy. But James didn't stop there. The proceeds from the sale of their homes went toward repairing the damage they had done, funding community programs, and helping other families fight similar battles. For James, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about proving that the system that had been used for generations to push black families off their land could also be used to fight back if you knew where to look. Still, the victory was bittersweet. His grandparents weren't there to see it. The years lost could never be returned. And the truth was clear: James's story wasn't rare. Across America, black landowners have been systematically targeted, cheated, and forced out of what was rightfully theirs. But this time, the ending was different. This time, the man who was supposed to be powerless stood tall. He didn't just reclaim what was his, he made history in his town, showing others that silence and fear weren't the only options. And as word spread, people began asking questions. If this could happen to James, how many others had been robbed without even knowing it? How much land, how much wealth, how many legacies had been erased in the quiet shadows of paperwork and legal loopholes? James left the courthouse that day not just as a landowner again, but as a reminder: sometimes the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, it's living so well that their hate has no power left.